I mean, I think it reminds me of a lot of the different community members that I grew up around and that I looked up to. And so there were so many different fathers and just people in the community who, if I would not have had them in my life, I don't kind of know where I would be. And so having an opportunity to give back in some capacity to others is just something that's exciting for me. And so I believe my role, whether I'm in a church, whether I'm in a school, whether I'm in the community, is all about relationships. And so the way that I try to lead is through just effective relationships within, these are the things that I want to teach you, these are why I want to teach you those, this is what can happen in the world. And so instead of this like, do this or else, I have to, use my position to try to act like I'm in charge or I'm important. It's more like, hey, let's work this together. I'll give you what I have if it helps you to get to where we need to go. And I think that really helps. So I really enjoy it. It's fun.
This is a diverse school. Why is it important to have somebody like you that they can look up to?
I think diversity is such an important thing when we think about education, because there are so many things that are teaching us even outside of the classroom. And so when we start to think about just the opportunity that we have to have people who understand the community, it isn't even always about somebody who looks like you. That's important, but just somebody who comes from the community, who, when you say the Crown Market here, some teachers or educators have no idea what that means, but some of the students know what it means. And so I think it's important to be able to say, oh, I know where the Holly is, I know where the Crown Market is, I know what's going on the backside of GVR, and to have opportunities for us to be able to be about the community and serve that community. And so when we think about diversity and inclusion from that perspective, I think that's why roles like that are so important in education, is because it gives us an opportunity really to be in the community and be a part of the community. And regardless of your race, ethnicity, regardless of your age, regardless of even your religion, if you're somebody who can relate to somebody and explain to them why they matter and where they come from matters, and validate some of the experiences that they've had, I found that that really helps in education in saying, hey, I'm gonna push you to go to the next level. And they're willing to be pushed a little bit more because they're like, hey, I actually believe that you care, or I actually believe that you know what I'm dealing with.
We're talking to you because it's coming up on the year after George Floyd was killed. We've talked to you before about George Floyd. We've seen you out there during the protests. What has changed for you since George Floyd was killed?
Yeah, so the George Floyd verdict, the George Floyd case, the George Floyd movement around Black lives and how they matter was such a pivotal point of my life, because I've been a community leader and somebody who's worked in the community for a number of years, but this was the first time that I started to find myself engaging and interacting with cultures that weren't of my own, and really sitting down and having some of the harder conversations with individuals around things that they thought were important. And so just recently, somebody reached out to me off of social media and was saying, hey, Q, I hope this doesn't come off as offensive, but I just really don't understand the Black experience. What does it mean to be a Black male? What does it mean to be afraid? Like, could you just talk to me about that? And a year ago or 2 years ago, I may have discounted that comment or just been like, I don't really need to have this conversation. And now each of those type of conversations are valuable, because it's like, this person trusts me enough to be able to have a hard conversation or explain somewhere where they're not very knowledgeable, and be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know. And I think that's what has changed for me around the verdict, around the case, around the movement, was just finding myself engaging in some of the harder conversations, some of the needed conversations, and some of those spaces that I would have probably shied away from a few years ago.
We've heard this from other people too for this story. Is it a burden sometimes to be getting all of that, to be asked, to have that asked of you, to explain the Black experience? That's a big thing to explain. Does it get tiring?
Yeah, I think for me, no, because my grandma always used to say a statement, heavy the head that wear the crown. Heavy's the head that wears the crown. Heavy's the head that wears the crown. And what it often told me was that in leadership, there's often going to be work that has to be done, but if you step up to lead, that's often what happens, right? In a forest, the tallest trees are the ones that catch the most wind. And so when you start to think about having the audacity to rise or to be higher it gives you an opportunity to realize you're going to catch it from a lot of different areas. But if your roots are deep and if you know where you're grounded, it allows that tree to stand tall. And so in moments like this, it says that, okay, there's experiences that I've been able to live through, that I've been able to learn from, that now, because I've lived through that or had those moments, I'm able to share those experiences with others. And hopefully that means that that experience wasn't happening in vain, or that those moments weren't just random moments to happen. And for me, it's just really interesting to see kind of how the dots come together, that, 10, 15 years ago, I was one of the people who had been beat by a police officer in Colorado, and now years later, I'm able to talk about, well, what does police reform look like? Or why is it important for us to be able to make sure that we have mental health individuals who are riding with police officers? Or what does it mean to feel like a black man in America in 2021 and still feel afraid when you see certain things or when you have certain experiences? And so I would say, just as heavy as the crown is, it's also a great responsibility, and one that I'm thankful that I lived long enough to be able to be in the position to be either A, respected enough to be asked, and B, to have enough knowledge about some of the situations that I'm in to be able to have a response that people will say, okay, I want to listen to that, as opposed to just being a squeaky wheel that's always saying things and nobody's ever trying to give me grease.
Yeah, your experience with police 10, 15 years ago, looking back at that, in that moment, back then, could you see yourself where you are today? Or tell me about that, where you were, that path, what was happening in your life then?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest with you, I never thought I would live as long as I'm living. And so it was such an interesting position to be in, growing up in a neighborhood where you often see more violence than you see not. I've been to more funerals than weddings, more wakes than graduations. And so having that experience growing up, I was just happy to meet certain milestones like 18, 21, 25. And then so as the years got older, I started finding myself almost surprised that I was reaching another age. And so when we first got into the George Floyd case, it was actually my birthday, the day that we first started marching. And my birthday's next week. And so as I start to think about what has all happened from 1 year around the sun, it's so amazing and it's so incredible to just feel. And so when I was 18, 19, being beat up by the police officers in Denver, I didn't really even have the mindset to know that this would be an opportunity, that there would be moments where people would want to hear about that experience, would want to learn from that experience. At the time, I was just trying to survive. And I think that's such an important place to be for a lot of people, where when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can't even talk about self-actualization and some of the things that we want to experience if your basic needs aren't being met. And at that time, I was just trying to survive with those basic needs.
Can you tell me a little bit about what happened, what led to that?
Yeah, so being from the Park Hill neighborhood or just other neighborhoods at the time, there was always this perception of what you represent and who you are. And unfortunately at that time, being a black male from that neighborhood automatically made a lot of people believe that you were a gang member, that B, you were just a menace to society, that you were involved in things that you shouldn't be involved in. These are stereotypes that you not only hear, but you live through. And so a group of friends and I, we were downtown getting ready to, transition back and forth through college, and had a chance, as it was like my last weekend to be in Colorado, to just go out, to celebrate, to be around. And we went to a nightclub off of 20th and Market Street. And while we were there, had a great time, and we were leaving from that situation, and a bunch of people were out at the let out. A lot of people were just around, and some fighting, some stuff happened across the street that had nothing to do with us, and the police started to clear the lot. Understandable, something happened, need to clear the lot, respect. And so as we're counting or doing head counts of the people who are in the vehicle with us, we realized one of the young ladies who had rode with us had not made it in the car yet. And so as the first officer came over, it was like, hey, sir, we have one more person coming. We're definitely ready to leave. We're not going to be lingering anymore. Can you give us just a moment to find her, get her in the car so that we can leave? First officer said that would be fine. So as we start moving back to the car, a second officer approaches the vehicle and says, I thought he told you to clear the lot, and starts macing the vehicle. Before we had a chance to respond, before we had a chance to explain, and the other officer, unfortunately, didn't do anything. And so we found ourselves in a position of sitting in a vehicle being maced, While that moment was going on, we ended up being maced 8 times before different people got out of the car and ran. And I ended up getting on the phone calling 911 and trying to report the incident of saying, hey, we're in a situation where I don't know if we're gonna make it out. And you can hear the officer on the tape say, you're a very big pain in my backside, he uses a different word. He grabs these 3 arms, push a pressure point, flipped me down. I landed on my face. He handcuffed my right arm to my left ankle, drugged me a little bit, stood me up one more time, maced me, and threw me in a paddy wagon for my first time in jail. And so I ended up going to jail for that incident. The charges that I got were inciting a riot and disobeying a lawful order. And then while we had to go through court for all of these different situations, thankfully I was able to have a lawyer by the name of David Suro who saw the case, came and started working with us. And he said, okay, I'm gonna help you. And I had bruises on my face and other parts of my body at the time for just how forcefully I was thrown to the ground. And David Suro went to the attorney and was like, you know, the district attorney at the time, and said, you know, if I play a tape for you, will you do the right thing? And she was kind of like hesitant. And so the police officer in his report had said, like, gang member downtown cussing at the police, throwing expletives. We had to neutralize the situation because of how aggressive that he was getting, trying to get the group to try to riot against us and justifying his action with all of these things. But the unfortunate thing was that 911 tapes record. And so all of these different actions or things that he was saying that I was doing, you could not hear on the tape. But a lot of the things that I said that had happened, you could. And so you could hear him saying I was a pain. You could hear me asking for his badge number. You can hear me saying please or I'm sorry in these different situations. And so thankfully in that situation, I had a 911 tape. I can't imagine where I would be right now if I did not have something to validate what I had said as opposed to what the officer had said. Because in going to court, I just was another person who fit the bill of all of the different stereotypes that he said that I was. But thankfully, we had a great lawyer. Thankfully, that when we played the tape, the district attorney did the right thing, and we had an opportunity to get out of that situation.
So when the police report about what happened, what police said happened with George Floyd came out, and then the video came out, probably didn't surprise you that those things were very different.
Yeah, I think it's been so often that the narrative can be whatever the authority figure says it is. And so we find ourselves often just believing because we should, right? They're in this position. Why would they lie? Why would they not tell the truth? And so you often find yourself in a position of just believing what it is they have to say. And unfortunately, that's not always what it is.
When you look around at these kids that you are helping educate and grow, do you worry they're going to find themselves in a situation like you did, in a situation like George Floyd?
All the time. And I think that's why this work is so important, is because instead of allowing the school to prison pipeline to just be you get in trouble, you get disciplined, we kick you out of the school, we expel you, we do all of these different type of things to put you in the system, I think it's important to have people who understand the system in which a lot of us are in, and then figure out ways to give the lessons without having to always throw the stick. And I think having that relational piece of like, hey, I could expel you right now for this action, or I could suspend you right now for this action, or I could call the police and try to criminalize certain things. And obviously there's certain things that you have to in, you know, certain situations, but I think for our school and for other educators that I know who are in these similar positions, we take a very strong priority in trying to make decisions that are going to guide, help, and teach without just throwing somebody to the system. And I think the two things are very connected as far as what happens in the community around police and police reform and what happens in the schools around educators. If you have a bad teacher, if you have a bad administrator, that student experience is going to be much like somebody walking down the street who's being profiled by the police.
How do you feel about like pushing these students to continue their education I'll explain. We talked to a man yesterday who said, a black man in Fort Collins, who says he feels like a privileged black man because he had an education. Do you think about that and trying to make sure your students also get that education?
I definitely feel privileged from the fact that I have a grandmother in the 30s who graduated from college. I have a mother and a father who both have master's degrees. I myself not only went to college, but went to graduate school and have a master's degree, right? And so when I start to talk to students who they're the first generation or the first one to make it to high school, some have still not even had parents who made it to high school, right? So I definitely feel privileged in that sense of understanding that I come from a family who had an opportunity to push education, to know the value of education, and because of that education, there are opportunities that I'm able to walk into and that I'm afforded that some people around me are not, right? Growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there are a lot of friends of mine who do not understand college, don't understand what college was or should be, right? But coming back and seeing me with my fraternity brothers or seeing, when I bring them to school with me or we go to homecomings and stuff, I have a few friends who are like, I would have never even thought about going to college if I wasn't your friend, or if I would not have had some of the experiences that we've had together. And so in hearing that from them, I definitely understand that I'm privileged in the fact that I recognize the value of college. And so while I sit in a position like this, I try to push those same things, right? The banners behind me are historically black colleges and universities intentionally, right? So that when somebody's looking up and they're seeing these things, they'll be able to have a little bit of eye recognition. And then years later or months later or times whenever it works out, they can say, hey, I know about that school. Maybe I'll go to that school. Or hey, I saw Mr. Q's frat brothers come to the school. I know about that thing. And some of the privileges that I was afforded by having parents who are educated, by having a grandmother who was educated, can start to trickle down even if they don't have those models in their lives.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that you've been thinking about. Like,
I mean, we're just wasting tape waiting on you. Not like you're loud or anything.
I can ask you a question.
Nah, you can't.
Anything you've been thinking about now that it's been nearly a year, that you've been reflecting on that?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I reflect on is the fact that mental health is real, and that this whole experience of police brutality, this whole experience of the bureaucracy of government, this whole experience of understanding some of the different realities that some of us find ourselves in is a real reality that often is cloak and daggered with mental health, right? And so often we're not able to share that some days I'm not okay. Some days I don't want to have an opportunity to be on the front page of sharing certain things, but that it's valuable for us to sit in those moments. And so the thing that I have really been pondering is like, what are the steps that we're gonna have moving forward to acknowledge that some of this is a part of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? What are the different triggers that we may have when, if I'm walking down the street and I hear somebody scream out, it's a very different reaction that I may have than somebody else who hears that. Or when I hear people are getting ready to storm the Capitol, I may have a different reaction or fear than what somebody else may have. And so I think for me, one thing that I'm taking as a nugget from this entire experience is like, prioritize my mental health. It's okay to take a day off. There may be moments when people need to call you and they want to do certain things. It's okay to say no. It's okay to justify what that no is, but it's also okay to make sure that folks know sometimes I'm offline. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes I'm going to prioritize sitting with my grandmother because she's 100. I want to make sure that every moment that she has is a moment that I have an opportunity to experience and grasp and just seek the wisdom that she may give. And I think before COVID and before the Black Lives Matter took off the way that it did, there were a lot of times when I was just busy because I thought you're supposed to be busy, right? Busy is progress. Busy is making sure people know that I'm doing the right thing. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is take a break. The best thing that you can do is read a book. The best thing you can do is call somebody and just say, I was thinking of you today. And I think that's what I've taken away from this entire moment is that although the camera's always on and the microphone's always hot, it doesn't mean you always have to speak or be seen. And sometimes it's very valuable to just take some moments to yourself, reevaluate who you are, what your purpose is, and then be okay with what the outcome is.
Absolutely. What did you think? Your
All right, so being from Colorado, the question was just seeing people come out. What other part was that?
Well, it doesn't happen here. And why did you think that happened? And what did you think about that? Because you're from here, you probably had never seen people in Denver come out like that. And Denver's super white.
It is.
Right? Like it is.
Yeah, the George Floyd version of protest was so very different than many of the other ones that I've been involved in, right? So I had gone to Black Lives Matter protests before that, right? Where, you know, we may have 1,000 people, or there's been Heal the Hood marches where, you know, if there was gang violence that had happened, you would have people come out. I went to the March for Women where it was so many people, and being able to see kind of what that was, but it felt more performative in some aspects of like, hey, I'm gonna take pictures with my signs, or I'm bringing my family out, and it didn't feel as violent as some of the other protests that I have been to. And so I think this was a combination or a culmination of all of those experiences, and being able to say, people can come out in numbers even if it doesn't truly affect them. It is an opportunity for us to mend and build together and to work together. And so I was proud to be from Colorado. I was proud to be in Colorado. And it was also interesting to see that it wasn't just Denver, right? So often things that happen, we will have a collective or a group of people from Denver show up, or we'll go to the Capitol or the city county building or city park, right? But there were protests that I've been to, or actions that I was in that happened in Castle Rock, and I was able to go with a group of people as we marched in Castle Rock, and we were able to watch people in Castle Rock who had AR-15s and did not believe in what we were saying, but there was a group of people who did. We were able to go over by Southlands, and a really good friend of mine, Tamika, was able to organize a march out there, and we're walking by Southlands and being able to be next to, you know, $50,000 or $500,000 houses, and people looking out like, what is happening? And it was a small group, but it was a group. And so I think the thing that was the most remarkable for me within this last round was just how many different areas that people felt like they wanted to do something. They may not have known what to do or how it should look, but they were like, I can't just wait for somebody else to be my savior or wait for somebody else to lead it. I'm willing to pick up the phone or jump on social media and say, hey, would you come to this march, or would you mind speak? I don't even know how to really organize it, but can we work together to do things? We saw students who are reaching out and saying, hey, I've never even done this type of thing before, but I'm going to do it. And we had a group of students from this neighborhood, a group of students from other neighborhoods who had an opportunity to really just lead and grow. And so I think that's the piece that stands out the most to me, is like, although Denver has kind of had different levels of activism, I've never really truly seen so many different communities come together. Colorado Springs, Durango, there was stuff that happened in Telluride, even Aspen. And so being able to see all of those different things was really, really powerful. And it gave me hope for the future that we may have as a collective community, to be able to say, even if you don't fully understand, even if you're not fully a part of, you're able to show up, show out, and make sure that we can move forward. See what,
Always true.
right. Riza, I know I was clear on where you should be at. Don't let the camera fool you. I would say the last thing that I would like to say is that for a very long time in my life, it felt like there were two Americas, two realities, two experiences, things that I felt or that I had to go through that when I would talk to others, they never knew about or they had never experienced, right? I had to go through the safety talk with my family of when you get pulled over, turn off the car, put your hands out the window, roll down all of the windows, just so there's no mistakes. And for so long, trying to explain those experiences to others who had never experienced them felt hard because it was almost dismissive, right? Somebody who may be in this country illegally experiences that they feel is gonna be a lot different than somebody who doesn't have to worry about when somebody rings the doorbell, are they gonna call somebody because they see the wrong thing? And so I think with this experience, one thing that was so beneficial for me was people were willing to have the harder conversations, or at least willing to accept that somebody else's reality, although it may not be their own, was something that was valid. And I think having that validation, the fact that it is different, that we do live in different realities, that we do have different experiences was so powerful. And I think if we can continue to have safe spaces, open spaces, places where we can say, I want to hear your story, I want to hear your experience. And as much as I'm a gong or a clanging cymbal around lives about blacks and making sure that people understand the experiences that I've been in, I also want to be an ear to other communities and to others who may feel still voiceless or still feel unheard, because I still think there's many stories that aren't being told, many experiences that others don't know is very valuable.
The validation thing is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, people get it.
In some respects, right? And so even with the news, right? When folks were first coming out to report these stories, the way that the news media were claiming that they were portraying the story was a lot different than where some of the media outlets are now. Some of them still are there, right? And want to be able to keep certain stereotypes up. But I think that's also been very valuable of like, what is newsworthy? Are we going to continue to run the story at night that this is a riot and people are destroying things? Or are we going to actually start looking at the humanity of why are people upset or what is going on? And I think that's valuable on both sides. There's things on the other side of the aisle or other side of opinions, other side of thoughts that I may not truly understand, but the more that we're able to have really honest dialogue and communication around those things, I think at least gives us an ability to move forward, as opposed to always saying the same narrative of people from that neighborhood or people from that race, people from that demographic are always going to act or react in these different type of ways. And so I think one of the big challenges moving forward is how do we make sure that the media and the crowd and the groups, that we don't just pack up and feel like we've made it because the George Floyd case is over. How do we make sure that we're still recognizing that we haven't reached the finish line, we still need to have some very valuable conversations, and that there's still a lot of work to do. So we still need to roll up, we still need people to roll up their, their sleeves, get their arms dirty and get to work.
People have been killed by police since George Floyd was killed.
Several. Yeah, it did not end. And even sadly, when we think about the legislation, right? So locally, we've been able to enact certain legislation, but in the same way that that legislation has been enacted, there's places that are really going back in time and saying, okay, because the progress happened in this way, we want to take back some of the rights and responsibilities, we want to take back some of the opportunities. And I think one of the craziest things is saying, okay, we want to make filming police illegal in some places, as opposed to the negative act that the police are getting filmed for doing illegal, right? It's just little things like that, that regardless of your politics, regardless of your race or your religion, I don't understand how saying, okay, capturing something that is wrong should be criminalized as opposed to stopping the thing that is wrong in the first place.